Well, happy day, you guys. It is September, and yes, I'm wearing a sweater. I was so cold. I just took my son to his football practice, and I was freezing. So I had to put a sweater on before I came in to do this. But you might be listening to it now, or you might listen to this recording later, which is what I find happens quite a bit on our own time, that people will come back and say, oh, I needed to listen to this webinar. So if you're listening to it live, you can actually put some stuff in the chat box and I'm able to interact with you. And then for those of you who are watching the recording, I'm always happy to answer your questions later on that you've come up with on here. So I know that when you're looking at food and your mood, you might know that you already know what's healthy to eat, right? You're like, oh wow, I wonder if she's going to come on here and tell me to eat kale. We're not going to go through lists of food and what to eat, but rather what I want you to do is start to understand what effects food have on the body. Once you start to understand the why behind eating and the why behind why it might be off, or what you feel like might be off inside of your child or your body, whether it is the way that they're behaving or what they're eating, and you start tying some of those things together, it's going to be so much easier to be able to change. And I got to tell you, the older the kid is, the more that they can understand it. You know, you tell a teenager that his acne is because of the sugar, they're going to make a real quick change, right? They don't like to have acne on their face. So really what we're going to take a look at today or tonight or whenever you're watching it is how you can get a bigger, better understanding of what's going on inside the body to make bigger, better choices. Because quite honestly, when you are, you sit back and you take a 30,000 foot view, which is kind of what we're going to do here in a little bit of how the body works, and you take a 30,000 foot view of your life and say, all right, what's my ultimate goal here? What's my end? What do I want to make here in the end result? Because there's often times where we're just kind of stuck in a rut. We don't really know what direction we're going. But when we can look at the long game and we can look at the end of where we want to be, what I truly believe is we're here to serve a purpose on this earth. And the best version that we have of ourselves helps us achieve that even more, even faster, even bigger, even better. And that's what we're here to be able to do. That's why we come in late at night and do these webinars. That's why we have lengthy conversations with our patients and consultations and intakes to understand what's going on and how can we help you best? Because we have a very firm foundational understanding and belief in the human body, knowing it should be healthy, it should self-heal, it should self-regulate. And guess what? Food is your fuel. It really is. They've done studies and have looked at the cells after you've eaten dead food. The cells look dead. And you eat healthy, alive food, and the cells are healthy, energized, and alive. And that should be like, for some people, like, oh, wow, I get it. And then there's other people that are on here saying, well, we eat really, really healthy. We eat really, really clean. I don't understand what's going on. I don't know why my digestion is off, or, my mood's off. I've got all sorts of inflammation. Maybe you got any sort of thing on this list going on, and you're like, I don't understand it. Well, that's when you're going to take a look back at the body, how it's working, what's going on, a bigger picture of the environment. And then we're going to hone in closer to the gut, and the immune system is really tied to it, but the gut and digestive system, and how it links to that brain, and how it can really start to interfere and play off, especially when digestion is off. And even if you're eating all the right foods, you're like, dude, I'm eating kale, and that kale's not being digested very well, right? It makes me feel bloated. It makes me feel icky. I don't feel like I'm absorbing the nutrients. Maybe you're nutrient depleted. So this becomes a very common theme in people's homes, whether it's constipation or problems digesting food, or just complete defiance, food aversions, intolerances, black circles around the eyes, food allergies, rashes, eczema, sleep disturbances, all the things, toe walking, sensory struggles, difficulty potty training, inattentiveness, and inability to focus. So we're going to get a really good picture of what's going on. So let's kind of take that big 30,000 foot view and really look at what's in control. And we all know that the brain is in control. We're all like, okay, yes, I get it. The brain's got to do literally everything. It has to do everything, and it gets a bad rap sometimes. There's billions of dollars, probably trillions, that have been poured into the brain and understanding the brain, which has been really cool because you can look at what the brain does and how it's operating. And then there's often times where later on we've started to understand, especially through like functional MRI, we look at the brain and say, it's not that piece of the brain that's not operating right. It's actually coming from a different area. And modern medicine says we don't understand it. Chiropractic says because we look below the brain, we know that the nervous system doesn't end right here at the cranium, that your brain has to get information from somewhere, and it's your nervous system. It's that thing you're living your life through completely. Every single organ, cell, and tissue inside of your body, every single system inside of your body, including your digestive system, it is run through your nervous system, and the quality of that nervous system matters. The clearer and more concise the information to the brain is, the clearer and more concise the information sent back out is going to be. Garbage in is going to be garbage out as well. And there's often times we don't quite give that piece of our body, our health, a close enough look. And there's often times where we're just beating ourselves up or beating our head against the wall saying, I'm doing everything right. I don't really understand what's going on. We've tried all these things. We're eating well, we're sleeping well, we're exercising, we're meditating, and something still is amiss. And we don't take a look at that bigger picture to say, let's see if there's something interfering with that brain and that body from communicating appropriately and interfering with this function, because you should be able to absorb the nutrients inside of your food for it to feed this every single cell inside of your body. Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is an amazing researcher, I mention him in probably every single webinar and every single talk that I ever do. He says the function of your nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. All other cells. He is a highly awarded scientist and PhD researcher. He's awarded for stem cell research. He's looked at how environment changes cells and how much that really matters, how it's not genetics either necessarily that's going to cause you to have any sort of symptomatology. He looked at the epigenetics, knowing environmental factors that were triggering these genetics. And he also takes a look at the body as an entire system as a whole, and then breaks it down to the tiny little cell to say, every single cell inside of your body has the same systems that your body does as a whole. It has respiratory, it has an excretory, it has a digestive, it has a waste excretion. It has everything. And every single one of those cells, which is controlled by your nervous system, has to have clear communication. When we have chaos inside a body, we're like, oh man, those cells aren't working well, and there's chaos, the system, the community becomes off, and energy gets put into that chaos, just like it would in any other community. And now the body starts putting its energy towards the chaos. It starts draining its own battery to say, I got to figure this out, I got to calm things down, something's going on. Or there's so many different chaotic pieces inside of the body because there's been so much stress for so long that the brain cannot handle anymore. It doesn't have the amount of energy to put into every single system in the body. And here's what we typically see. The brain is a huge energy suck. It takes up so much of our nutrients and our oxygen. And all sorts of our energy. And when your brain is trying and begging for energy, knows that there's something wrong, doesn't know how to fix it, you're also going to see other systems in the body starting to be compromised and not working the way that they can. The gut being a huge one, digestive, immune, and endocrine. Those three systems typically in that order, but not always. And as 80 or 70, whatever they say, % of your immune system is in your gut. So it really matters how that thing is operating. It really matters how your brain is communicating it. In a little bit, we're going to look to see how would that be off? What would be interfering? What's going on? And what do we do about it? Which is really my ultimate thing, to give people some more hope about understanding their body, about understanding what's going on, about taking a bigger, broader approach to understanding the body to say, okay, the nervous system is off. Now what? Now, what do we do? What's going on? What's going on inside the body? How does this happen? And let's just start to keep digesting that. A lot of what happens inside of our nervous system is very unconscious. It's that autonomic system, and you don't even know what is happening. And they often will say that there's about, I think, 11 trillion bits of information going to your brain at any given second. You're consciously aware of about 50 to 200 of those signals. So very unconscious. And a lot of what we will notice is in the way that we feel. So through our senses, everybody knows about the top 5 senses, but there's a couple that we're going to talk about today. And most importantly, that enteric sense of how do I feel inside? Because that's what we'll notice with kids is they don't know, because they have such a disconnection in that nervous system and the way that their body feels and that intuition that's there that says, I have to go potty. And instead it's this burst of energy that says, go punch my friend, right? Go throw a Lego. Another system or another feeling inside of their body might be, I have a tummy ache. And instead it comes out in complete meltdowns, in inability to sleep, in crying and screaming. They don't have that connection that's fully there. And they also often don't have the verbal skills to recognize it, to say, oh, my tummy hurts. This is what's going on. I feel angry. I feel irritable. I don't feel good. I'm tired. I'm not sleeping well because I'm uncomfortable. Where we can recognize that as an adult, but often we just kind of push it away and just keep rolling. And all of a sudden you're like, man, I was so grumpy. It's because my pants were tight. No, it's a true story, right? It's a true story. Your pants are tight. You are grumpy. And that's how you feel inside. So here's what happens. You start triggering fight or flight responses. And we all know fight, flight, or freeze, but your nervous system has 2 modes of operation. It should really be at balance or homeostasis, right? That's the lack of chaos inside the body. That's ease, that's balance. But you also have 2 great and wonderful, amazing modes of operation that need to be there. One, that sympathetic fight or flight response is there for survival. It is there to be able to fight an enemy, run away, anything you need to do, that fight or flight response needs to be there. And then we have our parasympathetic, which is the reverse of fight or flight, which is rest, digest, heal, repair, growth, development. And here's the thing, you can't be in both at the same time. They're completely inversely proportional. So the more stress that we have, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, where it comes from and how we end up unfortunately making a perpetual cycle out of it, how when your sympathetic nervous system's on, your parasympathetic nervous system is not. They are very, very inversely proportional. Let me just kind of show you a picture of what that looks like. If you're on a small device, you probably can't see it, but when you're looking at it, they are literally the opposite. Constricts pupils, dilates pupils, stimulates saliva, inhibits saliva, constricts bronchioles, relaxes bronchioles. Like when you're looking at this, like slows heartbeat, accelerates the heartbeat. I keep having my pre-slide pop up here. You can look and see just how inversely proportional they are. So you can't be in both at the same time. And often we'll find out that a child or an adult is stuck in that fight or flight, becoming a perpetual cycle, and we don't know how to calm it down. We don't know how to get them out of that stuck. And that's something that we do inside of our office. And if you're a patient watching, you know all about this fight or flight response and how to calm that system down and how to keep the body in more of a balance, especially since there's times that we didn't even know that this was happening. Kids are developing neurological connections, a million a second. New neurological connections are being made inside of your child every single day from birth to 3. It starts to slow down a bit, but it is tremendously high up into 10, 15 years old. And when they are starting to get hardwired for fight or flight or stress, you're going to see that snowball perpetual system happen of fight or flight. And we have the job of slowing the system down, hitting the brakes, calming them down, unraveling, and really stimulating that parasympathetic nervous system, where they do grow, they learn, they thrive, they digest, they heal, they repair, which is where they should be at night, but often they're not even getting a good night's sleep because that sympathetic nervous system is taking over and running the show. And we often feed it, not knowing that we are feeding it. So when you look at this little cycle that says dis-ease, somebody that's not at ease or not at balance, when you have given a body stress, you can perpetuate that fight or flight response. And here's something I'm going to tell you guys. Stress can be constructive and it can be destructive. Exercise is designed to be constructive stress. If we don't heal and repair from it, It's destructive. It tears us down. It hurts our body. We're overtraining. We can't heal and repair. Our muscles hurt. Our joints hurt. And it's a no good because we haven't been in parasympathetic. And it doesn't necessarily mean you haven't had enough sleep. Sometimes that is the case, but other times is that the body can't calm down, it can't self-regulate, and we feed it even more, unfortunately. And this is often where our food can even come in. So stress comes in three forms: physical, chemical, and emotional. Chemical is often where that food lies. When our body feels stressed and it's tired, we always talk about it being wound tight and worn out. It wants quick supply of nutrients. It wants a quick fix. It wants simple sugars. It wants carbohydrates. It wants things that are easy to break down. It doesn't want to sit and digest a salad, nor does it want to sit and eat it either. It is stuck in fight or flight, whether it's a big time stuck in fight or flight or a little bit. I'll show you on a scale here what we have and how we measure that in our office. It doesn't want high dense nutrients. It just doesn't work that way. It wants quick sugar to the brain. The brain's ready to run. We also have physical stressors, and many that we'll often think about that interfere with our body, of like falls and accidents. However, a very huge overlooked, and sometimes, I think it's becoming more well known, physical stressor is not moving your body enough, is doing what I'm doing right now, sitting in front of a computer and not moving, not feeding and fueling the brain, sitting in front of a video game, on a phone, some sort of device. Unfortunately, kids are back in school, so it's in the classroom, and they aren't getting enough exercise to feed and fuel the brain. Emotional stress, man, I don't think I need to even talk about that over the last 18, 19 months, because we've all experienced how high emotional stress can get, how fear can kind of take over. It can give us anxiety. That's, once again, these are all going to perpetuate that fight or flight response and keep our body in survival rather than thrival. And our kids, adults, we'll start to lose our energy. It'll start to fatigue us and drain our battery. For kids, they are still growing and developing. They're still making those neurological connections. They're still exploring the world. They're still trying to figure out, what's what and who's who. And it can become very overwhelming. And unfortunately, when our world's more stressful than it ever has been before, a lot of kids are having more stress than ever before, and they come in with a more stressed nervous system than their parents have, knowing that the accumulation or even the percent of their life that they've experienced stress is greater than we have. I'm 40 years old. If I were to look at some of these little kids now, they might have more stress on their nervous system than I do, because 100% of their life has been stressed. Their mom might have been stressed while they were pregnant with them, and the baby might have had a stressful delivery, stressful I don't want to say an upbringing, but a stressful time nursing, latching, digesting, colic, reflux. If you haven't watched any of our infant webinars with Dr. Stormy, those are really great, looking at how that brain is developing, that craniofacial, and how all of that system works. But once again, it's through that nervous system. So here's a Bruce Lipton quote. Once again, you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. And here's how we measure it. Here's how we look at it. We have a heart rate variability test that all of our tests are non-invasive. So when you're looking at this test, you can look and see just exactly how stressed the body is inside and internally. How does it feel? It's a 3-minute test taken at rest, where you should feel balanced or at ease. Anytime the body is stuck in a state of fight or flight, it's going to shift off into this left-hand side over here. Anytime the body's stuck in parasympathetic, which once again, we've talked about, we shouldn't be there during the day. That's, you're asleep while you're awake, trying to heal and repair. We shouldn't be there either. And we have a variety of both. And the more stress we experience and the less healing and repairing we experience, the further down this line we're going to become. And, I've even seen babies way down here in this deep red. Once again, 100% of their life, they've had stress, and it's taken a huge toll, especially when it's enough stress inside of the body. So a lot of people want to know, well, how do you get this test? How does it work? What's happening? What's going on with this test? And we're going to talk a little bit about the very specific part of your body that's responsible for this, your vagus nerve. But what happens when you're looking at the heart rate, somebody who is experiencing stress, their heart rate's going to go up. They're going to have a high heart rate, and it's not going to come down, because they're in that chronic stress state. So somebody that's experiencing that chronic stress, heart rate's up and it stays up. When every time you take a breath in, the heart rate's high, the heart rate's high. When you take a breath out, your heart rate should come down. Your heart should be varied. It should say, I can respond to stress with a breath in, and I can calm and relax and self-heal and self-regulate. When we don't see a healthy variation there, we know somebody's had some more chronic stress, and it's going to take a little longer based on age and amount of stress to get that to start to come down. And we'll often see, I already had mentioned the systems in the body that become less of what they should be, being digestive, immune, and endocrine. Unfortunately, that's something that people start to experience is something called dysautonomia. The autonomic nervous system is now not working the way that it could. Those cells are off. There's chaos. They're not communicating. Fight or flight's taken over. And here's one thing I didn't really mention with fight or flight that I often do. When fight or flight is up, we call it flipping your lid. You've flipped your lid. Your prefrontal cortex is disengaged. This part of your brain that does logical, rational thought, that makes us human, does high level cognition, executive function, this pre-planning, this part of our brain becomes disengaged when we flip our lid. Our amygdala takes over in that fight or flight response. About 1,200 chemicals are dumped throughout our body, and our senses all go up. Heart rate's up, blood pressure's up, senses are up, our pupils are dilated. The feeling is just way up because we are just ready to run and flee. We've got all the other senses that I talked about. Hearing is up. And now the body having that altered sensation also brings down the immune system. It brings down the gut, the salivation, the digestion, the peristalsis inside the stomach, because it's ready to run and save your life. And this is when we really start to experience somebody with more symptomatology because of that chronic fight or flight response. Their body's not able to do it. And yes, sometimes it's just straight up out of the womb. And we'll talk very closely and a lot about this vagus nerve that I just had previously mentioned. This is that brain gut connection that people talk about. Your vagus nerve is really what calms the body. It's responsible for the calming effect inside of our body. It has got 9 times more fibers than any other nerve inside of our entire body. There's 12 cranial nerves. I should tell you guys this. There's 12 cranial nerves. 2 leave the cranial vault. One is the vagus nerve. Vagus means wandering. It wanders throughout those organs and runs that parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So even when we were looking back, don't look too closely because I'm going to kind of go back here really quickly and show you just the connection here in the parasympathetic. You can see where that vagus nerve is and how much it controls compared to the sympathetic nervous system and all those nerve roots and the controls there. This is huge. This can get big time restricted. And this nerve with this gut-brain connection can be the number one culprit when we see somebody under chronic stress and restriction in vagal nerve tone, which they've done research on these kids. The second nerve that leaves the body is actually your spinal accessory nerve. That's responsible for rotation here in your neck. I mean, how many times are people having a sore neck or a baby that's unable to latch? That nerve we typically know is also restricted. So here's a picture of the bottom of the brain stem, the vagus nerve, where it exits in this upper cervical, and then exactly what it's doing to affect the organs and glands, brain development. Our sense of security and safety is a huge piece of this. And some of the research that I've done, unfortunately, on mice and rats is cutting the vagus nerve. Vagectomy, figure out what happens. And when they find out that their inflammatory responses are off, food antigens, microflora, pathogens are up, all of the things that should be happening in the gut are all affected when that vagus nerve was snipped. Now they realize how closely connected it is and how it is a relay system back to the brain for the brain to be able to say, this is what's going on. This is what I need to do. And when there's stress there, when we're stuck in that fight or flight, we're still eating food. Typically, we call that stress eating, right? We're eating quick nutrients, or sometimes we are trying, even though we're in fight or flight, we're trying to be like, I know it's really healthy to eat a salad. I should do it. The body can't digest that food regardless. And that's when we'll start to see food particles being, coming through in that gut. We'll often see gap junctions open if people have heard of leaky gut, because the gut's not healing itself. It's not able to self-replicate the probiotics. We'll often see people like, I'm taking so many probiotics, but my gut is so deficient in flora, can't break down the food. Americans, unfortunately, have about 1,200 different microflora inside their body. We should have close to 40,000. We are very, very deficient. And yes, it has a lot to do with chemicals in the air and exposure to foods and toxins and the things that we consume, which keeps our body stressed and kills a lot of those. Those chemicals kill a lot of the microflora, and then often that we can't replicate it. Those gap junctions are open in the stomach and unable to heal and let the flora replicate themselves to break that down. And much of that vagus nerve, as they found in these research studies, unfortunately has a really big play in that. And then the immune system as well, not only because it's lining the gut like we talked about, but that relay system near the brain and that brainstem that is responsible for that immune system modulation and regulation. We call it the neuroimmune system because that nervous system really is in control first. And we also measure just specific stress to the upper cervical spine where that vagus nerve is, vagal nerve stress. We use a thermography scan to see exactly what's going on inside the body and look at the health of the organs and glands. We know there's going to be a temperature shift inside of the body. There's energy somewhere. The body's trying to heal. And it's okay to see it over time because we know specific areas in your body are going to need healing. That's a great and wonderful and amazing thing. We need your brain to have enough energy to be able to do that and communicate with all the cells inside of your body to be able to do it. And really, it's the sustained stress, accumulative stress over time is when it's consequential to our health. So when we start taking another view on, okay, where does this stress come from? I already talked about, you could have came from a mom that was very stressed. Here's the thing. Moms blame themselves enough, right? We're constantly like, oh man, that was my fault. Oh gosh, totally. Like, we just identifying our kids' behavior at times, like trying to figure out like, what did you do wrong? What is happening? And get really caught up in that and identifying it. And instead, this is designed to take a look and say, okay, here's where the stress can come from. So moms can start to understand it. I know that I wanted to know when my own son was struggling, what was going on? How could I help him? But I needed to know the whys behind things, which is also why I do these webinars so people can understand what's going on inside of the body. The why is so important to me, and understanding that I was stressed during the pregnancy and I had experienced a miscarriage just previous to that. I've had a lot of worry and angst. I was in a new place. We had just actually moved to Idaho. I didn't know a soul. I just had started my business. There was so much of my stress that is going to the baby. You look at that umbilical cord, and it's that power source to the baby. They're getting your hormones. They're getting how you feel. All the food that you're eating, it's getting pumped into that baby and kind of pre-setting them up for stress. And really, their sympathetic nervous system is the only thing developing up until 32 weeks before the parasympathetic nervous system starts developing, right? When all the organ growth and development happens about 32 weeks to 40 weeks, when they're like, the baby's going to gain half a pound to a pound. That's when that is happening. And often we have babies born before 32 weeks that really lack parasympathetic control because they never had a chance to develop it in the womb. And usually those stress pregnancies will result in some sort of birth intervention. We call them an augmentation now. So an injury during the birth process. And, you don't always have one of these or all of these, but typically one leads to the next. These can be very sequential. And the more that we have, the more stressful the pregnancy was, typically the more stressed the baby is. And you can kind of see the sequential order of what ends up happening. But usually when there's an intervention at birth, you're going to see a stress colicky baby, a baby that can't digest their food. They're screaming and crying, and someone says, oh, they'll grow out of it. But the first time they get a tooth, they get food stuck in their ear, they have an ear infection, they get prescribed antibiotics. And this often sometimes just is a repetitive cycle over and over again. They still aren't able to digest the food. Now that they're constipated, now they're really stressed. Now they're a hyperactive toddler that doesn't want to sit down to eat their food, doesn't want to go poop or pee on the potty. It's the one throwing the Legos because they do have to go to the bathroom, but they don't understand that feeling. And now by the time you ask them to go to school and sit down and sit still, that self-regulation, because that fight or flight response has been perpetuating inside of their body, they can't sit still. They can't focus. That lid is off. They aren't learning, growing, and developing the way that they could with this executive function happening, learning, development, growth, protection. Instead is taking over, and you aren't getting the best version of your child is really what starts to happen. They get really stuck. They start having sensory issues because those senses have been so high for so long. Stuff is too loud. Too much motion is crazy. Their pupils are dilated. They just cannot, they're jittery. They can't sit still, or they're at the point of wear down where they're now very tired and lethargic. They can't quite get through the day. They've been very disconnected. And sometimes this honestly happens at the start of the birth. Someone's like, oh, it was my calmest baby. They really didn't do a whole lot. But then that continues into not being able to do a whole lot because of the restriction that's placed on the body and the nervous system and the feedback to the brain. When you take care of tons of anxious, stressed teenagers that are depressed and then turn into, unfortunately, very burnt out, stressed out, exhausted adults, sometimes parents. And this is, once again, it's sequential, and one begets the other. And often the more of one we have, the more of the next one that we have. I didn't really notice a lot with my son until he was about 3, 4, when he was up against gravity for a longer amount of time, which is sometimes when we start to notice those problems is when they're up against gravity. If you remember me talking before, and if you've never heard me talk before, the brain is largely motor driven, mechanoreceptor driven. That's why when we were looking at the infants, maybe even going to your pediatrician and they're like, are they on track for their motor milestones? They're checking those because then they know the brain's on track. And the way the brain is organized, you can see in their physical body, the way that they move their body, whether it's all over the place. You can look at a human and be like, oh, wow, their energy is crazy, right? Oh, they're maybe very anxious, or they're very sad, they're very depressed, they move very slow. Or you might see someone that you understand that their brain really is moving very slowly. They're not able to connect the dots. Things take a little bit longer. Their words take a little bit longer to even get it out and formulate a sentence. Their physical body always matches that organization of the brain. And here's a huge thing and a huge piece that was often so overlooked. I'm going to show you guys this video, and I really hope and pray that it's going to play for me because this is really important to watch. I'm going to take it full screen. And hang on, press play. You know what? On this new, oh, nope. Oh no, I don't have the video working. Darn it. I didn't try it when I came in here, which I usually do. Oh, okay. Well, here's what I want to show you. And if you've never seen a C-section birth, you need to see this birth. If you have seen my videos before, you've seen this birth. I've seen hundreds of births. That's what I used to do as I was getting trained. And when you start to look at exactly what happens during a birth process, during a cesarean section, and even sometimes vaginal births, the amount of tugging and pulling and twisting that happens on a baby's neck is absolutely unbelievable. They've done research on it. They've looked to see we'll use up to 120 pounds of vacuum force to get a baby out. 140 is decapitation. I know that sounds absolutely disgusting, and it is. 60 pounds of axial traction is put on a baby during the unnatural birth process. And here's the thing. We would never in a million years touch a baby's head or neck that way outside of the womb. It just doesn't happen. That's the number one thing we protect. Yet the day that they are exiting mommy's belly to come to the outside world to take their very first breath with absolutely no idea what gravity feels like, absolutely no way to protect themselves, they're tugged, twisted, pulled, sometimes pushed out of the birth canal. And we wonder why they never stop screaming. They can't nurse and latch while they don't feel good. And when you even think about injuring yourself, if you were to pull your shoulder or your knee or twist it, it hurts, right? There's inflammation, there's irritation. You can barely move the thing. It makes you irritable. And when we're talking about those tender, delicate fibers of that vagus nerve area that I just talked about, this is a really big deal. This is a lot of neurological interference. And what'll happen is that neck will lock up. We call it dyskinesia. It will lock up and stay locked. We can see kids to varying degrees. You can even go look at your children at the home, in their home, maybe when they wake up tonight, and look at ear leveling. Your eyes are always going to stay to the horizon. So you'll look to see how it's going to tilt the head and neck, the shoulders, rotation to keep that central focus there. because the body's in protection. You often see plagocephaly in babies that weren't able to rotate, nurse, and latch, where it starts to flatten the skull because it is in protection. It's not going to move into an area of neurological interference, into an area of restriction. It's smarter than that. You're like, oh man, I keep changing the baby's, their head position, and they just aren't keeping it there. They keep going back to their favorite spot. It's their favorite spot because it's really comfortable. And if they are willing to mold their head and put pressure on the most important system, most important organ system inside the body, it's probably a pretty big deal. But instead, we'll, slap a helmet on it often and say it'll be fine in a little bit. And we continue down this road of struggle and problems. And here's kind of a picture, that internal picture of what it looks like when I see someone kind of stuck like this, or a little bit of rotation, the head and the nose is off. We will see it stuck there, and we'll see energy change there. We'll see, and here's another huge piece of that motor system. Over half of the motor system to the brain is in that upper cervical spine by that brainstem. There's something inside of those muscles called the eyes of your spine. They're muscle spindles and muscle stretch receptors. Anytime they bend and move appropriately, not when they're locked and fixated, they're giving feedback to the brain to say, here I am, I'm okay, everything's all right. This is what's going on. When it doesn't, it's going to be part of that perpetual stress response. They're also going to have their senses are going to be way off. We measure it as well. This is one of our energy scans to look at exactly what's going on inside of the body. And I know you can't see my little neural fuse box here, but when you look in this upper quadrant and you're looking at your first 3 cervical vertebrae in your neck, that's where your brainstem is at. That's where your vagus nerve lies. That's where your immune, digestive, respiratory, you get it. All the things up inside of that brainstem are running the show. And if you remember, you guys, do you remember Superman? Do you know what vertebra he broke? Upper cervical, C1 and C2. He's completely, incapacitated from here down. Couldn't even breathe. He had a tube, couldn't hardly talk. And, when you start a look at just a tiny shifting there in that upper cervical, just a little bit of pressure, you have to know that it's going to affect things down the chain, just like it does when there's severe injury to it. That's just way more blatantly obvious. And unfortunately, not a lot of people are looking at it. And we have altered perception to the brain. We get altered function, motor function, gut function, immune, speech, social, emotional, behavioral. It's a trickle effect all the way down. That fight or flight response is not turning off. They aren't responding very well. They aren't digesting their food. They can't absorb their nutrients. They don't feel very good. They can't sit still. They're having a hard time slowing their brain down to understand what's happening. When somebody's talking, they can't even necessarily hear the words appropriately because there's such a disconnection in that brain to be able to formulate those sentences. Now they've got social, incapabilities to be able to interact. They're not slowing down to pick up on body language, how somebody looks. And nowadays we're covering our kids and our adults and our parents in masks, and they don't understand. They can't see their body language. They can't see the socialization. They don't understand what's going on. And that body language is so huge. We're pretending like this isn't a big deal right now by just covering it up and understanding our kids aren't at risk right now. But also the fact that this social development is huge. Watching mouths are huge. Watching body language is huge. They are learning. Do you remember all those neurological connections that are happening right now inside of their brains? This is such a formidable time in their life. They need all of this to be lining up appropriately for them to be able to function appropriately, for them to be able to reach whatever God-given potential they have here, whatever purpose they're here for. They're not going to do it through this altered nervous system. They're not going to be able to do it through, a world that's not supporting them either, which is unfortunately, the case for us recently. So how long does it take? This is a huge question. Somebody asks me because I say, what's really amazing is the body can self-heal and self-regulate. What's really amazing is you should know that this is all typically not the energy piece of it. It's called dysponesis, is very reversible. You can really look at those errors of energy output, which is what you're seeing on the last slide, and know that can change. The brain can maintain better control. Yes, there's physical limitations of matter that can happen, especially if we're talking about a cervical break like Superman had. But when there's not huge physical trauma and damage, you wouldn't believe what people are able to accomplish. You wouldn't believe the miracles that walk through our office, come through our office, the people that come to us, whether it is just a tiny thing of this child is causing, this much stress in our home. And that's not even a tiny thing. And now everybody else is thriving because this kid can calm down, self-regulate. I'm not worried about him anymore at school. He can sit and listen. I'm not afraid the principal's going to call because they had a meltdown. I'm not afraid that they can't put the new pair of pants on that I bought because it's so uncomfortable. And we've had so many kids come through here that are like that, learning disabilities, unable to read, can't quite connect the dots, unable to make it through kindergarten without needing a nap. Very lethargic, unable to respond, still having food aversions to the point of eating baby food because they can't swallow. That's just not the way it should be, nor should anybody settle for it. So when you're looking at this scan, you're looking at your brain's ability to change and the amount of effort that it takes to do so. And yes, there's more effort the older you get, but if you look, that line doesn't end at 70. Your brain can always change. Yes, it might take more effort. I got to tell you what, your brain can change. It is placid. It can make huge new neurological leaps and bounds. You would be amazed what you can do and what it's capable of. Even my very severely spectrum kids who are now 17, 18, 19, who parents thought that there was no hope, start making better sense of the world. Start communicating more effectively, being more calm, being more tolerant, formulating their own sentences, understanding we're going to do this, this, then this. Things that they couldn't even do before. Are they going to be writing novels? Probably not. Maybe not. But you know what they're going to do? They're going to be living their very best life. And whatever capability and potential is there, we are not going to limit them. It is not our job to limit anybody. It's not our job to label anybody. It's our job to say, body can restore. Here's where the nervous system's at. Here's where we want to take it. Let's see what the body's capable of. And I got to tell you, some great side effects that we have are calm, more controlled, coordinated, organized, and connected kids, which also translates into adults as well. And it's pretty amazing and beautiful. So here's the thing. I know, once again, I didn't talk a lot about food, but I talked more about why you might not be able to digest your food. Why your gut might still be off, why you might have inflammation inside of your body. One of the things during fight or flight that goes up, inflammatory response, in case you're going to get wounded, injured. Your body needs to be able to respond to that and to respond quickly and appropriately to that wound. You're going to see high inflammation. You're going to see repetitive inflammation as well throughout that gut. And if there's one thing I want to tell people to start to do to make good changes, is just small things over time. We often just want these huge changes, big things, all, just tell me everything to do. Let's make this huge turnaround. And you can do it. Some people are motivated for that. But what we found is consistency over time. A brain through a clear nervous system makes the best choices, heals the best, feels the best, and you become your best through that. So making sure that you're paying attention to your stress, making those changes, getting your child, if you're not somebody in my office already, get a scan, bring your kid in, bring yourself in, bring your husband, your wife. I doubt there's husbands on here. That's kind of like, I guess, a little biased, but a lot of moms are the ones watching these and then relaying information to hubs to say, here's what I heard, here's what I understand, this is what might be going on. We need to get a scan. We need to know if this is what's going on inside of our children, because that's the best thing, is we don't have to guess. We can absolutely test it and say, yes, this is what's going on. We can measure it. We can look through your intake to say, here's through those 7 steps where the stress was. Here's what we're going to do to help remove it. So as always, at the end of my webinars, I've got a little QR code. I have a little open invitation to say, if you haven't already come in, if you haven't already got a scan, if you don't know if your nervous system's sound, come on in, scan this bar. It's going to get you that first day that's normally between 300 and 189. If you're very complicated, we're looking at 300. If it's, just an average case, we're looking at 189. This is for $100 to come in, fill out the intake, sit with the doctor, go over your entire history, get an examination, get a neurological scan, and then sit down with the doc to find out what's there, and then understand, here's what it's going to take to remove that stress. Here's the game plan. Here's what's going on, later down the road, to say, this is where we want to go and this is what it's going to take. And here's how we can measure it. And then we check in about once every month to say, all right, what's the body doing? Where are the changes? Where is it healing? What's happening? And help support the families through that and understand that change is good. The body is adapting and you are becoming a better